Hello, settle in comfortably, wrap yourself up warmly, and let the gentle whisper of stories carry you into a deep, peaceful sleep. The year is 1845. A brisk trade wind, heavy with the scent of salt and sugar cane, whips across the docks of Kingston, Jamaica. Amidst the clamor of arriving ships and the shouts of stevedores, an inconspicuous cargo is unloaded, destined to weave itself inextricably into the island's burgeoning identity. Dried cannabis, or ganja, as it would soon be known. This was no accidental discovery, but a planned introduction driven by the shifting tides of labor and economics in post-slavery Jamaica. Following the full abolition of slavery in 1838, the large estate owners faced a critical labor shortage. The newly freed Afro-Jamaican population, seizing their autonomy, largely abandoned the arduous and poorly compensated plantation work. To fill this void, the British colonial government initiated a system of indentured servitude, primarily importing laborers from India. Between 1845 and 1917, over 36,000 East Indians arrived in Jamaica, bringing with them not only their customs and culinary traditions, but also the cannabis sativa plant, long revered in their homeland for its medicinal and spiritual properties. Historical records, particularly manifests from ships arriving from Calcutta and other Indian ports, confirm the inclusion of cannabis seeds and dried plant material among the personal effects and regulated cargoes of these indentured workers. Early colonial reports from the period frequently mention the widespread use of Indian hemp by the new arrivals, initially viewed with indifference by the authorities who associated it with foreign customs. Dr. William Wright, a prominent botanist and physician of the late 18th century who studied Jamaican flora extensively, had already documented cannabis sativa in the region, but its widespread cultivation and cultural integration began demonstrably with the arrival of the East Indians. Imagine standing amidst the bustling docks, observing the disembarkation. Beyond the bales of textiles and barrels of salted fish, small bundles of dried plant matter, easily overlooked, represented a profound cultural implant. These laborers, arriving with meager possessions, cherished their ganja, using it in traditional Ayurvedic medicine as a dietary supplement and for spiritual practices, particularly within certain Hindu sects. This initial period marks the foundational step in cannabis's integration into Jamaican society, a seemingly minor agricultural import that would fundamentally alter the island's social, economic, and spiritual landscape for centuries to come. The scent of its arrival, though subtle then, would soon permeate every corner of the island. High in the Blue Mountains, where the mist clings to ancient trees and the air hums with the promise of revelation, a new spiritual movement began to coalesce in the 1930s. As we observed in our last chapter, ganja arrived in Jamaica with indentured East Indian laborers, initially cultivated and consumed within their specific cultural contexts. However, its true integration into the Jamaican national identity and its elevation to a sacred sacrament would occur through the burgeoning Rastafari movement. The Rastafari faith emerged from the socio-economic upheavals of early 20th century Jamaica, a response to centuries of colonial oppression and racial injustice. Central to its theology was the belief in the divinity of Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, as the living God. Preachers like Leonard Howell, Joseph Hibbert, and Archibald Dunkley disseminated these teachings, often in rural communities and among the marginalized working class. It was within this fertile ground of spiritual searching and resistance that cannabis sativa found its profound purpose. While the exact historical moment of ganja's adoption by Rastafari is debated, sociological studies and ethnographic accounts from the mid-20th century consistently link its usage to the early adherents. Anthropologist N.J. Fikes, in his extensive work on Rastafari, notes that by the 1940s and 50s, the holy herb was firmly established as an integral part of livity, the Rastafarian way of life. This wasn't merely recreational, it was a deeply spiritual act informed by specific interpretations of biblical passages. Passages like Genesis 1:29, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, and Revelation 22:2, the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations, were interpreted as divine sanction for its use. The act of smoking ganja, often communally in a chalice, a water pipe, became a ritual known as reasoning. During these sessions, Rastafarians engage in meditative contemplation, theological discussion, and prayer, believing the herb facilitates spiritual awakening, deeper understanding, and a closer connection to Yah, God. It was viewed as a tool for elevating consciousness, a natural medicine, and a cleansing agent for both body and spirit. This ritualistic integration transformed ganja from a simple plant into a sacred sacrament, a vital component of Rastafari identity and practice. The adoption of ganja by Rastafari, concurrent with the movement's growth throughout the mid-20th century, cemented its image not just as an intoxicant, but as a symbol of spiritual devotion and defiance against Babylon, the oppressive Western system. This powerful association would, in turn, propel ganja onto the global stage, forever altering its perception and tying it inextricably to Jamaica's cultural narrative. From the sacred communion of Rasta reasoning, a practical necessity emerged, securing a consistent supply of the holy herb. As the Rastafarian movement gained traction from the mid-20th century, particularly in rural communities, the cultivation of ganja moved beyond incidental garden plots to more organized, if still covert, networks. These fields of green became not just agricultural zones, but vital community hubs, embodying self-sufficiency and resistance. The primary regions for ganja cultivation in Jamaica historically centered around the less accessible mountainous interior. Parishes like St. Anne, Westmoreland, and Manchester became known for their ideal microclimates, consistent sunlight, ample rainfall, and rich, fertile soil, perfect for cannabis growth. Farmers, often Rastafarians or sympathetic rural residents, developed extensive knowledge of horticulture, passed down through generations. This included understanding optimal planting seasons, natural pest control methods, and the intricate processes of pruning, harvesting, and curing to enhance potency and flavor. Access to these areas was often challenging, requiring traversal through dense bush and steep inclines. This geographic isolation inadvertently provided a degree of protection against early colonial and post-colonial law enforcement efforts. While the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1948 criminalized ganja, its enforcement in remote, small-scale farming operations remained inconsistent. Farmers largely operated within a localized economic system, with community elders and trusted intermediaries facilitating trade. This insular structure fostered strong social bonds where collective effort in planting and harvesting reinforced community ties. Anthropological studies from the 1960s and 70s, such as those by Vera Rubin and Lambros Komitas, highlighted the deep cultural embedment of ganja cultivation. They documented how its growth provided a source of income for marginalized communities, particularly those excluded from the formal economy. It was often a cash crop cultivated alongside subsistence crops like yams, callaloo, and plantains, providing a crucial lifeline. Moreover, the act of cultivation itself was often imbued with spiritual significance for Rastafarians, a connection to the earth, and a means of preparing the sacred sacrament. Imagine a small plot hidden within a natural clearing, meticulously tended by hand. The wisdom of the seasons, the feel of the soil, the subtle signs of plant health. This was the farmer's university. The transition from scattered individual plants to more organized, albeit clandestine, agricultural enterprises solidified ganja's economic role, fostering a network of growers and distributors deeply rooted in Jamaica's rural fabric. These communal efforts further cemented ganja not just as a spiritual tool, but as an economic backbone for many, profoundly connecting the illicit crop to the island's informal economy, and by extension, its national identity. Beyond the hidden fields and the meticulous cultivation methods, the true heart of ganja's integration into Jamaican identity lies in its sacred ceremonial use, particularly within the Rastafari faith. Here, it transcends its botanical origins to become the chalice and the word, a profound spiritual tool fostering introspection, communion, and spiritual elevation. The central ritual involving ganja in Rastafari is the reasoning session, a gathering where members come together to discuss theological principles, interpret biblical prophecies, and seek divine guidance. At the heart of this ceremony is the ritualistic use of the chalice. Typically, this refers to a water pipe, often crafted from natural materials such as coconut shells, bamboo, or calabash gourds, symbolizing purity and connection to nature. The act of preparing and sharing the chalice is imbued with reverence, frequently preceded by prayers and invocations to Jah, God, and Emperor Haile Selassie I. Scholars like Stephen Davis, 1985, and H. W. Barry Chavans, 1994, have meticulously documented the specific structure and significance of these sessions. The ganja, often referred to as ital, natural, pure, or the wisdom weed, is never used for mere recreational purposes within this context. Instead, it is seen as a sacrament, a medium to unlock deeper consciousness and facilitate a direct connection with the divine. Participants believe its consumption cleanses both body and mind, sharpening their spiritual perception and enabling more profound reasoning, a term for dialectical spiritual discussion. The sessions involve not just the physical act of smoking, but a verbal exchange rooted in Rastafari philosophy. Participants articulate their understanding of Scripture, world events viewed through a Rasta lens, and personal spiritual insights. The herb is believed to aid in this intellectual and spiritual exercise, fostering clarity of thought, promoting peaceful dialogue, and uncovering universal truths. The communal sharing of the chalice signifies unity and collective spiritual pursuit, strengthening the bonds within the community. Imagine the glow of embers in a darkened room, the rhythmic inhalation, and the whispered prayers before a deep discussion unfolds. The ganja is not the object of worship, but the catalyst for worship, a key to unlocking spiritual pathways. This ritualistic, controlled, and deeply sacred use of ganja demonstrates its complete transformation within Rastafari culture. It serves as a powerful testament to the herb's role, moving from an imported commodity to a fundamental element of a spiritual practice, thereby embedding itself deeply within the sacred fabric of Jamaican identity, an identity increasingly defined by Rastafari's global influence. From the quiet contemplation of the chalice ceremony, the influence of ganja erupted onto the world stage with the irresistible rhythms of reggae music. As Rastafarianism gained adherents and visibility in the 1960s and 70s, its sacred herb, initially confined to spiritual reasoning sessions, found a powerful melodic voice, transforming ganja into a globally recognized symbol of Jamaican counterculture and identity. Reggae music, born out of ska and rocksteady, became the principal vehicle for disseminating Rastafari philosophies and challenges to the status quo. Artists like Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Wailer, who were devout Rastafarians, unabashedly incorporated references to ganja in their lyrics. They didn't merely sing about it, they celebrated it as a sacrament, a tool for spiritual enlightenment, and a symbol of resistance against institutional oppression, often termed Babylon. Consider Bob Marley's iconic Kaya album or Peter Tosh's unapologetic anthem, Legalize It. These weren't just catchy tunes, they were powerful declarations of cultural and religious freedom. Marley famously sang, "When you smoke the herb, it reveals you to yourself," echoing the Rastafarian belief in ganja's capacity for introspection and self-discovery. Tosh, confronting the global prohibition narrative head-on, articulated a plea for recognition of its medicinal and spiritual value. Their music bridged the gap between the esoteric practices of the dreadlocked brethren and a diverse international audience. This artistic embrace had profound effects. Firstly, it normalized ganja for many, stripping away some of the negative stigmas imposed by colonial and post-colonial drug laws. Secondly, it fostered an understanding, however superficial, of the spiritual rationale behind its use within Rastafari. Music became the primary educational tool, explaining that for Rastas, ganja was not about mere intoxication, but about spiritual clarity and communion with Jah. The global spread of reggae, championed by superstars like Marley, brought Jamaican culture, Rastafari, and ganja into the homes and consciousness of millions worldwide. It imprinted the image of the Rasta smoking a spliff into the global psyche, associating it inextricably with Jamaica's identity. This musical phenomenon cemented ganja's place not only within the spiritual and social fabric of the island, but as an international emblem, intertwining the herb's destiny with Jamaica's unique cultural export. The very rhythms of resistance broadcast the sacred use of the herb, making it an indelible part of the island's national narrative and global image. Beyond its spiritual and cultural resonance and predating its global musical fame, ganja in Jamaica also held a firm place in traditional herbal medicine. Long before contemporary science began to explore the therapeutic properties of cannabinoids, Jamaican folk medicine recognized and routinely employed cannabis sativa for a wide array of ailments, cementing its practical utility within the national identity. The arrival of indentured Indian laborers in the mid-19th century brought not only the plant itself, but also centuries of Ayurvedic medical knowledge regarding cannabis. This body of knowledge integrated with existing African spiritual and herbal traditions already present in Jamaica, creating a unique syncretic system of folk medicine. Early ethnographic studies from the early 20th century, and particularly throughout the 1960s and 70s, documented extensive use of ganja for medicinal purposes across various Jamaican communities, not solely within Rastafarian circles. Specific applications were varied and numerous. Ganja tea, for instance, was and continues to be a common remedy for colds, fevers, asthma, and menstrual cramps. The plant was prepared as a poultice for skin conditions and inflammation. Extracts and infusions were used to alleviate pain, stimulate appetite, and aid in digestion. Research conducted in the 1970s and 80s by institutions like the University of the West Indies provided scientific validation for some of these traditional uses. Studies on the analgesic, anti-inflammatory, and bronchodilatory effects of cannabis compounds began to emerge, offering a scientific basis for what generations of Jamaicans already knew to be true. Consider the common sight of an elder preparing a soothing ganja compress for a child's cough or a cup of warm cannabis tea offered to alleviate arthritic pain. These weren't considered illicit acts in these traditional contexts. They were simply pragmatic applications of a readily available and effective natural remedy. This pervasive, community-based medicinal use fostered a deep understanding and acceptance of ganja that transcended legal prohibitions. The recognition of ganja's therapeutic value served to further embed it within the fabric of Jamaican life, extending its reach beyond spiritual or recreational spheres into the realm of physical well-being. It portrayed ganja not as a dangerous drug, but as a beneficial plant, an essential component of the island's natural pharmacopoeia. This deep-seated belief in ganja as medicine would become a crucial argument in later calls for decriminalization and reform, highlighting its multifaceted role in shaping Jamaica's national identity. Despite its deep cultural, spiritual, and medicinal roots in Jamaica, ganja faced a relentless legal battle for much of the 20th century. The benevolent embrace of the herb by Rastafarians and folk healers stood in stark contrast to state-imposed prohibitions, creating a long-standing tension between national identity and colonial legal frameworks. The legislative assault on ganja began formally with the Opium Law of 1913, which included ganja among its prohibited substances. This was largely influenced by international drug control conventions emerging from the League of Nations, driven primarily by Western powers. However, the first significant crackdown came with the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1948. This act criminalized the cultivation, possession, and sale of ganja, imposing harsh penalties including imprisonment and substantial fines. It effectively declared war on a plant deeply embedded in Jamaican indigenous practices. The enforcement of these laws disproportionately affected the poor and marginalized, particularly Rastafarians. Police raids on Rastafarian camps became common occurrences, leading to arrests, property destruction, and increased social stigma. These actions, rather than deterring use, often reinforced the Rastafari perspective of themselves as victims of Babylon, the oppressive colonial system. The legal suppression unintentionally strengthened the link between ganja and resistance, turning its use into an act of defiance against perceived injustice. Statistics from the period highlight the impact. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, ganja-related offenses accounted for a significant portion of arrests, particularly in rural areas. While precise overall numbers for historical convictions are difficult to aggregate due to varying record-keeping, Numerous reports by human rights organizations and sociological studies detail the pervasive harassment and criminalization of ganja users. The DARE, Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program, though originating in the U.S., also found its way to Jamaica, contributing to the anti-drug narrative disseminated through public education campaigns. Imagine the constant threat hanging over communities where ganja was grown, consumed, and revered. The shadow of the law created a clandestine existence for growers, users, and even those who simply believed in its medicinal properties. The criminalization of ganja not only fostered an illicit economy, but also fueled a profound sense of grievance and injustice among large segments of the Jamaican population. This protracted conflict between traditional practice and punitive legislation underscores a critical chapter in ganja's journey to becoming an undeniable, albeit contentious, part of Jamaica's national identity. The fight for legal recognition and social acceptance would continue for decades. As reggae's pulsating rhythms carried the message of ganja across continents, a new phenomenon began to shape its perception both domestically and internationally. Tourism. Beginning in the mid-20th century and accelerating with the rise of global travel, Jamaica became a coveted destination, and with it, the holy herb found itself presented to a curious, sometimes covetous, global audience. Initially, the tourist encounter with ganja was often surreptitious, a whispered offering on a sunny beach or a clandestine transaction in a bustling market. However, as the 1960s and 70s saw an influx of counterculture travelers interested in both the music and the spiritual messages of Rastafari, the demand grew more overt. Tourists, already exposed to the romanticized image of Jamaica through Bob Marley's music and the laid-back island vibe, often arrived with an expectation of encountering ganja. This demand, though illegal, inadvertently stimulated an informal economy that catered specifically to visitors. This created a complex dynamic. While local authorities continued to enforce strict drug laws, particularly against Jamaican citizens, a tacit understanding often emerged in tourist-heavy areas. The economic benefits derived from tourism, particularly the influx of foreign currency, sometimes tempered aggressive policing against visitors engaging with ganja. This dual standard was widely criticized but persisted for decades, illustrating the economic pressures influencing the perception and policing of ganja. Sociological studies from the late 20th century, such as those by criminologist Dr. Herbert Gale, noted the direct correlation between tourist presence and the visibility of ganja trade, albeit largely underground. Tour operators, guides, and even informal vendors would offer herb tours or easy access, transforming ganja into an exotic commodity. This commodification, while profitable for some, also risked trivializing its sacred and medicinal significance for Rastafarians and traditional communities. Imagine a tourist drawn by the allure of reggae and Rasta culture, perhaps experiencing ganja for the first time on the island of its symbolic origin. This encounter, for millions, shaped an enduring image of Jamaica as a place synonymous with reggae, Rastafari, and ganja. The tourist's gaze, while sometimes superficial, amplified ganja's global visibility and inadvertently exerted pressure on local authorities to reconsider their rigid anti-cannabis stance. The economic potential, a potent argument in any modern nation, began to outweigh the outdated prohibitions, paving the way for eventual reform. Beyond the smoke and the spiritual rituals, ganja has also subtly, yet significantly, permeated Jamaican culinary traditions, emerging in various preparations beyond simple ingestion. While not as universally recognized as its ceremonial use, the integration of cannabis into food, particularly within Rastafarian communities and traditional herbal practices, showcases another facet of its deep-seated connection to the island's identity. The concept of ital food, central to Rastafarian diet, emphasizes natural, unprocessed, and vegetarian ingredients. This dietary philosophy extends to medicinal herbs, and ganja fits seamlessly into this framework. Rastafarians, valuing natural remedies and believing in the plant's inherent goodness, often incorporate ganja into their cooking, primarily for its perceived health benefits rather than psychoactive effects. One prominent example is ganja tea, as noted in previous chapters concerning herbal remedies. This is frequently consumed for its anodyne properties, aiding in relaxation, digestion, or alleviating symptoms of colds and flu. The leaves and occasionally the flowers are steeped in hot water, often combined with other medicinal herbs like ginger or lemongrass. Similarly, ganja-infused oils or butters are prepared, though less commonly for direct consumption as for topical application or as a rich base for certain stews or cooked vegetables, particularly when seeking to impart a calming effect or to enhance appetite. Historically, the use of psychoactive plants in cooking is well documented across many cultures, and Jamaica is no exception. While not present in standard Jamaican cookbooks, ethnographic research and personal accounts from rural areas indicate a quiet tradition of incorporating ganja into select dishes. This is often done discreetly, reflecting the plant's illegal status for much of its history, and usually in forms that minimize its psychoactive impact while maximizing its perceived therapeutic value. The fibrous stalks, for instance, might be used in a broth, allowing for subtle infusion. This culinary integration speaks to the profound belief in ganja's inherent beneficial properties. It demonstrates a holistic approach where the plant is not just smoked for spiritual enlightenment or recreation, but also consumed as a natural food additive and herbal supplement. Imagine the subtle aroma of a healing ganja broth simmering over an open fire, a quiet testament to centuries of traditional wisdom. This lesser-known aspect of ganja's use reinforces its role as a versatile plant, deeply woven into the fabric of Jamaican life, extending its influence even to the dinner table and contributing to the island's unique and resilient cultural identity. Jamaica stands today at a pivotal moment in the history of ganja, transitioning from a century of prohibition and cultural suppression to a future where its economic and social potential is being cautiously embraced. This evolving leaf represents not just policy change, but a reaffirmation of national identity, seeking to integrate deeply embedded cultural practices with modern economic realities. A landmark shift occurred in 2015 with the amendment of the Dangerous Drugs Act. This critical legislation decriminalized the possession of small amounts of ganja, up to 2 ounces, making it a ticketable offense rather than a criminal one. More profoundly, it legalized ganja for medicinal, scientific, and therapeutic purposes, and importantly, for religious purposes by Rastafarians. This move was the culmination of decades of advocacy from Rastafarian groups, human rights organizations, and a growing recognition of the plant's economic potential. The establishment of the Cannabis Licensing Authority, CLA, was a direct consequence of this reform. The CLA is tasked with creating and regulating a legal medical cannabis industry covering cultivation, processing, distribution, and research. This aims to leverage Jamaica's pre-existing expertise in ganja cultivation and its global brand recognition. Companies, both local and international, are now investing in large-scale legal cannabis farms, research facilities, and dispensaries. This presents a complex challenge: how to facilitate economic growth and create a legitimate industry while protecting the interests of traditional small-scale growers who historically bore the brunt of criminalization. Looking forward, the debate continues regarding full recreational legalization, which would further align policy with pervasive social practices. Proponents argue for increased tax revenues, job creation, and a more robust tourism sector. Opponents often cite potential public health concerns or international treaty obligations. However, the global trend towards cannabis reform, coupled with Jamaica's rich cultural heritage, suggests further liberalization is likely. Imagine the fields that were once hidden, now openly cultivated under regulatory guidelines, supplying a legal market that respects both tradition and science. The legacy of ganja in Jamaica is one of resilience, spiritual defiance, and economic adaptation. From the docks of 1845 to the reggae stages, from medicinal teas to modern dispensaries, ganja has not just been an herb in Jamaica, it has been a catalyst for cultural expression, a symbol of resistance, and now a potential engine for economic development. Its future will continue to be intertwined with the island's journey, forever a distinctive and integral part of its national identity.